of filibustering over the past legislative year. According to information provided by LegCo, lawmakers approved 13 new construction projects worth $3.6 billion. But the amount is tiny compared with $90 billion the year before. In response to the Pan-Democrats' non-cooperation movement, groups such as the Hong Kong Construction Industry Employees General Union and the Hong Kong Institution of Engineers plan to rally against filibustering in LegCo. In a telephone interview with TVB, chairman of the Hong Kong Construction Industry Employees General Union, Chow Lun Q, warned that 70,000 people from the industry could be out of work if legislators continue their non-cooperative actions. But New Democrats lawmaker Gary Fan doesn't think that filibustering affects the livelihoods of construction workers. Defending the non-cooperation movement, Fan said what the Pan-Democrats want to achieve is the even distribution of construction workers for different projects. He explained this can be achieved by ensuring white elephant projects can be carried out in an orderly and reasonable manner. Fan stressed that he will approve projects that are beneficial to people's livelihoods, such as the construction of schools. As for Friday's Finance Committee meeting on the construction of an incinerator and landfill expansion plans, Fan has submitted 300 amendments. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying has been consulting different political parties on his upcoming policy address, but Pan-Democratic lawmakers will not be meeting with Leung. Instead, they have provided their suggestions through a joint report. Owen Fung reports.
Earlier, 23 Pan-Democratic lawmakers' request to meet with Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying as a group was rejected. The lawmakers have since pledged to boycott the CE's consultative exercise.
But since the Chief Executive has completely lost his legitimacy to govern, so we all decided that this is not a man that we should go and talk to.
Instead, the 23 legislators jointly submitted their views in a report to be sent to Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam and Financial Secretary John Tang. It contains 102 suggestions. The Pan-Democrats called on the Chief Executive to step down. They also urged the SAR government to ask the National People's Congress Standing Committee to retract its framework for political reform in Hong Kong and restart the five-step reform process. In addition, they want the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance changed to cover the Chief Executive. And on the Independent Police Complaints Council, the legislators believe the watchdog should be reformed to strengthen its abilities in monitoring abuse of power by officers. The Pan-Democratic camp has not ruled out the possibility of meeting the Chief Secretary and Financial Secretary, but they'll have to wait and see how the administration responds to their submission. Owen Fung, TVB News.
A 12-year-old boy was fatally shot by police in the U.S. state of Ohio after brandishing what turned out to be a fake gun. Police in Cleveland had responded to an emergency call stating that someone was waving what might have been a toy gun at a playground. Officers told the boy to raise his hands. Instead of doing so, he reached for his replica gun. That's when one officer fired and shot him in the torso. The two officers involved in the shooting have been put on administrative leave pending an investigation. One lawmaker plans to introduce legislation to require all toy guns to be brightly colored so a tragedy like this never happens again. Meanwhile, millions of Americans remain glued to a racially charged case in Missouri. That's where a grand jury is still trying to decide whether to press charges against a white police officer for fatally shooting a black teenager.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Hundreds of protesters took to the streets of St. Louis on Sunday night. They're eagerly waiting to hear whether or not a grand jury believes Officer Darren Wilson had just cause to shoot 18-year-old Michael Brown this summer.
It shows that we're still positive and that everyone's organized. We're going to make sure that we continue to fight against this injustice against black and brown people.
The grand jury consists of 12 people, 7 men and 5 women. Mirroring Ferguson's demographics, 9 of them are white and 3 are black. Possible charges the officer faces range from murder to manslaughter or no charges at all. At least 9 jurors must agree with the final decision.
I know that we will win.
Knowing many demonstrations since the victim's death have been violent, police remain on high alert. Those congregating at a local church prayed that peace and justice prevail.
Let's get justice, because that is the American way, is the trial and jury, and you're not guilty until proven guilty.
U.S. President Barack Obama echoed that sentiment.
You know, this is a country that allows everybody to express their views. Any event as an excuse for violence is contrary to rule of law and contrary to who we are.
Back to the grand jury, where the pressure is on. They're painfully aware that a decision not to indict may trigger a massive riot, not just locally, but nationwide. Local police hope the following message resonates. They insist they don't see Ferguson residents as black or white. They see one race, the human race.
The Israeli government will put forward a bill to anchor into law Israel's status as the nation state of the Jewish people. But as Tony Saban reports, critics of the proposed legislation say it could undermine Israel's democratic principles and discriminate against the rights of its Arab minority.
Israel's cabinet has approved a controversial bill which would officially define the country as the nation-state of the Jewish people. The bill, which still needs to be passed in parliament, on paper looks to define Israel's existing Jewish nature into law. But it's drawn accusations that it will undermine the country's democratic character. Some rights groups have even denounced it as racist, saying it could be used to discriminate against Israel's Arab minority. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected this argument, saying the nationality bill was needed to anchor both Israel's Jewish and democratic nature, at a time when he said many were challenging Israel's existence. Still, not all in the coalition government agree with the bill, with 2 members of the cabinet voting against it. Finance Minister Yair Lapid, who heads the centrist Yes Atid party, called it a bad bill, which is badly worded. He would later go to an emergency meeting of his party to discuss further steps. The vote also comes at a time of soaring tensions between Arabs and Jews, amid a wave of violent attacks, including last week's deadly assault on a Jerusalem synagogue in which 2 Palestinians killed 5 people. The Israeli government has vowed to respond to the wave of violence with harsh new measures, including a proposal to strip Palestinian attackers of their residency rights. Tony Saban, TVB News.
Iran and 6 world powers look set to miss today's deadline for resolving a 12-year standoff over Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Negotiators are already looking at a possible extension of those talks, but as James Aiken reports, the cost of not reaching a deal could be high.
After an intense week of high-stakes nuclear negotiations, the clock is quickly ticking down.
I wouldn't want to give any false hopes here. We're still quite a long way apart, and there are some very tough and complex issues to deal with, but we're all focused right now on trying to get that deal done.
The right deal could transform the Middle East. It would open the door to ending crippling economic sanctions on Iran and lead to warmer relations after decades of hostility with the West. But as the self-imposed deadline looms, an extension looks all but certain. The cost of failure to reach a deal could be high. Iran's 2 regional rivals, Israel and Saudi Arabia, are worried about a weak agreement that would fail to curb Iranian nuclear activity. At the same time, a collapse of the negotiations would encourage Iran to become a threshold nuclear weapons state, something Israel has said it would never allow. The growing sentiment from both sides is that a final deal is still too far off.
Of course, if we're not able to do it, we'll then look at where we go from there. But at the moment, everybody's talking about how we are going to try and bridge that gap and move things forward.
While some Western officials question the Iranian leadership's desire for a compromise, 2 possible options have emerged for an extension. Under the first scenario, described as the stop-the-clock option, the talks would simply break off and both sides would meet in a few weeks for another attempt. A second, lengthier option would be a formal extension into